The ballroom shimmered with gold accents and crystal chandeliers, but the real spectacle that night wasn't the gala's opulence. It was the moment a man tried to replace his wife on the very stage she had built, and realized far too late that she had scripted the entire evening. Welcome to the Pendleton Grand, Chicago's crown jewel of corporate elitism, where betrayal would be exposed under 1,000 lights and a woman's silence would echo louder than any headline. I stood at the entrance, perfectly composed in a black velvet gown with a neckline sharp enough to cut glass. Around me, the air buzzed with the clinks of champagne flutes and polite laughter of the business elite. This gala wasn't just celebrating 15 years of Northwind Technologies, it was also our 15th wedding anniversary. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. Until Nathaniel Carter, my husband, rewrote the script. Or so he thought. Nate was already inside, glowing with false confidence, flanked by a woman who looked barely old enough to rent the penthouse they now shared. Her name was Ava Lynn, his latest protégé, or as the press called her, the rising star of digital strategy. I had another name for her. But I never said it out loud. Words, in my experience, were most powerful when used sparingly, and backed by evidence. As the gala host readied her cue cards, I walked the red carpet with poise that only years in federal courtrooms could teach. Cameras flashed, unaware that the woman they photographed wasn't just the ex-wife-to-be. I was the storm about to unravel a legacy built on fraud, ego, and stolen trust. Inside, the Pendleton's ballroom was a theater of masks. Investors, executives, journalists, all here under the illusion of celebration. I took my place at table 3, the same one Nate and I had claimed at every gala before this. But this time, the seat beside me was empty. On purpose. Nate was holding court at the center stage table. He stood tall, grinning as he raised his champagne, his hand resting on Ava's waist like a trophy on a shelf. She wore silver sequins and borrowed confidence. What she didn't know was that the necklace gleaming at her throat had once belonged to my mother, and had disappeared from my safe 6 months ago. I had let it go missing. Just as I had let her rise. Nate spotted me and approached with Ava in tow. He was magnetic in public, always had been. "Camille," he said smoothly, "meet Ava. She'll be taking my attention moving forward." His voice dripped with ego, loud enough for those near us to hear. Laughter bubbled nearby. He was enjoying himself. I smiled politely. "Lovely," I replied. Taking attention seems to be her specialty. Ava blinked. Nate smirked. He mistook my calm for surrender. He always did. What Nate didn't know was that I had spent the last 11 months collecting more than just broken pieces of a marriage. I had retraced every lie, every dollar funneled through dummy funds, every whisper of insider trade. And tonight, the final act would begin, with perfect timing and a full audience. The gala program had just reached the keynote moment. Elliot Carter, Nate's father and Northwind's founder, rose shakily to the stage. His eyes, once sharp with suspicion, had dulled with age. Nate helped him up like a dutiful son. Ava followed, radiant and ready. But I was already standing. I approached the stage, interrupting the fanfare with slow, deliberate steps. The room hushed. My heels clicked like a countdown. I reached Elliot, took the microphone, and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "I believe," I said, voice calm, "it's time the truth took center stage." Gasps echoed. Ava froze. Nate paled. From the folds of my clutch, I withdrew a slim silver drive. This contains 15 years of celebration, and 18 months of theft. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Nate took a step forward, but I held up a second item, a small velvet box. I opened it slowly, revealing the necklace Ava wore, and a photo of me wearing it 10 years ago at this same gala. Evidence, timed and planned. 2 men in dark suits appeared at the ballroom doors. Not security, federal agents. The same agents I had trained with, years before I traded my badge for boardrooms. I looked at Nate one last time. You always said I didn't understand your world, I whispered. You were right. I understood it too well. The agents began walking forward. The screens behind the stage flickered, and the Northwind logo was replaced with a digital trail of documents, accounts, photos. Everything laid bare. I stepped down from the stage, returning to table 3. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. The gala hadn't ended. It had just begun. They always said Northwind Technologies was unshakable. Built on brilliance, inherited by blood, and run like a fortress of steel and glass. But every fortress has cracks, hairline fractures invisible from the outside until something heavy slams against them. That night, the cracks began to split wide open. And I was the one holding the hammer. As the agents moved through the ballroom, Nate's facade started to splinter. I watched his mouth move, trying to issue explanations, excuses, damage control, but none of it mattered. Not with Agent Miles Grant standing just behind him, badge out, voice calm. Mr. Carter, we have a few questions regarding the accounts connected to Aurelia Holdings and Cascade 47. Nate's smile faltered. That was the moment. The exact second he realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't going away with a phone call to legal or a donation to a campaign. This was a federal operation, one built with precision, and timed to detonate right here, on the floor of his own empire. Ava stepped back slowly, as if trying to unattach herself from him without drawing attention. But the cameras had already caught everything. The diamond necklace. Her presence on stage. Her name in the financial trail. I turned away from the scene, letting the agents do their work. I had more to do. I slipped quietly through the side exit of the ballroom, where a black sedan was already waiting. Inside, a man handed me a folder. Confirming all backups delivered, he said. Board packages, press drops, the works. Your timing was flawless. I flipped through the folder, photocopies of documents, wire transfers, internal memos signed by Nate under shell aliases. Months of work, layered and catalogued like a courtroom war file. I'd built it while he built his tower of lies. For every lavish gift he gave Ava, I pulled the receipt. For every late night he claimed to be negotiating with partners in Hong Kong, I had login logs showing his true locations. Back at home, I had walls of evidence. Photos. Email printouts. A map of the entire structure of the embezzlement ring. I'd built the case the way I'd been trained, by noticing what most people ignored. But the real breakthrough had come when I found the ledger. Not the digital one. The physical book hidden behind a panel in his office wall, in a safe he thought only he knew. It detailed every off-the-books deal, every silent partnership with Ava's ghost companies, every falsified bonus check disguised as consulting fees. He'd hidden it well. But not from me. That ledger had been the first domino. I'd taken it straight to Miles. That was 4 months ago. Back at the gala, the news had already broken. My phone vibrated with notifications. Headlines. Alerts. My name wasn't mentioned yet, but it would be. The anonymous whistleblower. The wife turned investigator. They'd write stories. They'd speculate. They always did. But I didn't care about the press. I cared about the board. Northwind's executive board had been uneasy for a while, small inconsistencies, growing expenses, opaque reporting. But Nate had silenced every whisper with charm and numbers. He was good at numbers. Good enough to fake them. That's why I'd send each board member a customized envelope. Not just files. Proof tied to their decisions. The missing pension fund for Mr. Alcott. The fake Asian market report fed to Mrs. Jian. The disappearing charity donations for Dr. Mendoza. I made the corruption personal. That's how you make them act. My phone buzzed again, this time, a message from Miles. Asterisk, he's being read his rights now. You want to see? Asterisk. I tapped into the security feed from the ballroom. Nate was sitting at a table now, hunched over, his hands on his knees, face flushed and jaw clenched. Ava was gone, escorted out through a side door by 2 agents. She wasn't under arrest. Not yet. She had struck a deal with us weeks ago, conditional immunity, full cooperation. And she had delivered. Nate looked up at one of the agents and asked something I couldn't hear. The agent shook his head slowly, then pointed toward the screen above the stage. The screen still cycled through slides, transaction records, shell companies, and emails marked confidential. Every lie he told now had a timestamp and a witness. I watched Nate slowly turn toward the camera. And in that 1 second, his eyes locked with the lens, as if searching for me. As if realizing I had never left the room. But I had. I was already moving on. In a quiet conference room down the hall, members of the Northwind board were gathering behind closed doors. Not for drinks. For an emergency session. And this time, they'd be listening to someone they had ignored for years. I walked toward that room, folder in hand, heels silent on the polished floor. I didn't need to knock. When I opened the door, every head turned. Mrs. Hart, the chairman said, standing. We're ready to hear everything. And so I began. I stood at the head of the long mahogany table, facing the board that once viewed me as an accessory to Nate's image. The wife who smiled at galas. The woman who stayed silent in boardroom lounges and posed politely in holiday newsletters. But tonight, the silence was over. 12 members. 12 chairs. 12 expressions ranging from disbelief to dawning shame. They had come expecting chaos, maybe scandal. They didn't expect me. Before I begin, I said, placing the folder on the table, I want to make one thing clear. This isn't about revenge. It's about integrity. They said nothing. Good. They were finally ready to listen. I opened the folder and began distributing its contents, carefully labeled documents tailored to each individual. Their names were handwritten in the corner of each envelope. I had made sure of it. This wasn't a digital leak. This was personal. Inside, I continued, you'll find a breakdown of fraudulent activities conducted under Nathaniel Carter's leadership. Embezzlement. Falsified shareholder reports. Insider deals funneled through Ava Lynn's shell corporations. None of it is conjecture. All of it is verified. Mr. Alcott, the pension fund overseer, adjusted his glasses and flipped through the pages with trembling hands. Mrs. Jian scanned the Asian market documents, her face growing pale as she reached the 3rd chart. Dr. Mendoza muttered something under his breath when he saw the fake foundation records with his name attached. This is impossible, muttered Vice Chair Daniels. We run quarterly audits. There's no way he could have. He knew your audit team, I interrupted. He paid them. Ava's team cross-checked the numbers. You were all looking at what he wanted you to see. The room fell silent again. I stepped back, letting them absorb the weight of their own negligence. This wasn't just about Nate's crimes. It was about the culture that enabled him. The culture that discounted me because I wasn't sitting at this table sooner. Your company, I said, is bleeding. And it's not just because of Nate. It's because you let a man charm you into silence. And you dismissed the one person who saw through him from the beginning. Chairman Moore finally spoke. Why now? He asked, voice low. Why tonight? I met his eyes. Because he chose tonight. He made it public. I simply gave the public something real to watch. A soft chime sounded from someone's phone. Then another. And another. News alerts. The headlines had hit. Nathaniel Carter detained at Northwind Gala in federal fraud investigation. Whistleblower confirms executive embezzlement scheme. Federal inquiry confirms shell corporations tied to Northwind vice president. Ava's name. Nate's name. Northwind. All in bold. And behind it, a wave of public scrutiny that would drown any corporate platitudes or delay tactics. I've already briefed the FBI and the Justice Department, I added. They have all my documentation. Ava Lynn has agreed to testify. She's already under protection. You turned her, someone whispered. She turned herself, I replied. Eventually, they always do. Especially when they realize the man they trusted was using them as a shield. The room shifted, a collective exhale of denial collapsing into reluctant acceptance. Then came the question I'd been waiting for. What do you want, Mrs. Hart? The one thing Nate never thought I'd ask for. Control. An interim leadership team will be required, I said. Public trust is eroded. Your investors will demand visible accountability. If you want to save this company, someone needs to take charge who knows both the damage and how to rebuild from it. And you believe that's you? I don't believe, I said firmly. I know. I handed Chairman Moore a single sheet of paper. My proposal, outlined in full detail. A 90-day recovery plan. A forensic compliance roadmap. A full board oversight calendar. Even a media strategy to protect what was left of the brand. This plan doesn't just stabilize Northwind, I explained. It purges the rot. I've already drafted exit settlements for implicated staff. Every step I've taken is in this folder. Chairman Moore read the final line of the document aloud. Appoint Camille Hart as Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, effective immediately. A long pause followed. Then Mr. Alcott leaned forward and said the words that would echo for years to come. I vote yes. So did Mrs. Jen. Then Dr. Mendoza. One by one, hands raised. The same hands that once applauded Nate's leadership now offered me something more valuable than applause. Authority. Motion passes, Moore said quietly. Effective immediately. I nodded once and gathered my things. As I walked toward the door, someone called out behind me. Camille. I turned. Why didn't you come to us sooner? I gave a small, knowing smile. Because none of you would have believed me until tonight. But now, I'm not just the wife. I'm the woman who burned your paper palace down, and will rebuild it in steel. And with that, I stepped into the hall, heels clicking with purpose. My phone buzzed once more, Miles again. Asterisk, he's asking for you. Wants to speak. Just you, asterisk. Let him wait. Nathaniel Carter sat in an interrogation room that smelled of dust and forgotten ambition. The sleek cufflinks he wore at the gala were gone, replaced by restraints that glinted cold under fluorescent lights. The man who once controlled boardrooms with a glance now couldn't even command the thermostat. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 1 hour. I watched him through the two-way mirror, standing beside Agent Miles Grant in the observation room. He hasn't said a word since you left the gala, Miles murmured. Until 5 minutes ago. Said he'll only talk to you. I said nothing. Do you want to go in? Miles asked. I nodded once and opened the door. The room was silent when I entered, save for the quiet hum of the wall-mounted camera. Nate lifted his eyes. They were bloodshot, red at the corners, a mix of disbelief and restrained fury. Camille, he said, his voice gravelly, as though each syllable cost him something. I sat down across from him, crossing my legs with calculated stillness. Let the silence sit heavy on him. Let him taste the control he thought he'd stolen from me. Why? He asked finally. Why now? You could've. You already asked that question, I interrupted. So did the board. The answer hasn't changed. You chose tonight. I simply honored your performance with a grander stage. He exhaled sharply, biting down a curse. You blindsided me. In front of Ava. In front of my father. That was low. I leaned forward. You stole from your company. You laundered money through ghost vendors. You funneled stolen funds into offshore accounts in Ava's name. And you wore a $10,000 smile while doing it. That was low. His hands clenched. She didn't know everything. She knew enough to flip, I said calmly. Ava was never yours. Just another pawn you underestimated. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out bitter. You think this ends with me behind bars? You think I won't find a way out of this? I know people. I built this company. You built it on your father's name and a lie, I shot back. And if you had even a fraction of the foresight you bragged about, you would have seen this cell before I ever had to. I pulled out a folder from my handbag and slid it across the table. This is your best-case scenario. He looked at it like it might explode. Plea deal, I explained. 20 years, cooperation clause, asset forfeiture. You sign it, you might see the outside again before your hair turns white. If not, the federal case will bury you. He opened the folder with shaking hands. And what do you get? Glory? A promotion? What does revenge taste like, Camille? I tilted my head, meeting his stare without blinking. I get peace. And I get your chair. His jaw tightened. Oh, you hadn't heard. I continued. The board appointed me interim chief ethics and compliance officer. As of tonight, I'm rebuilding the empire you tried to burn down. The investors are already calling. They trust me more than they ever trusted you. He pushed the folder away. You were nothing but a prosecutor with a pretty face when I met you. I made you. I leaned closer. And that, I whispered, is the lie you've always told yourself. You never made me, Nate. You delayed me. We locked eyes. This time, I didn't blink. He did. Do you know when I started planning this? I asked. The day I found that receipt for the diamond bracelet. You told me it was a client gift. I knew it wasn't for me. That was the day I stopped crying and started calculating. He stayed silent. I traced everything, I continued. The dummy entities, the Cayman accounts, the falsified invoices. You weren't even clever. You just thought no one would ever check. Still no answer. And your father? He's done with you. The board's finished. Your lawyers dropped you when they saw the forged signature documents. You're not fighting a scandal, Nate. You're walking through the rubble of your own arrogance. Finally, his shoulders slumped. The mask cracked. You don't know what it's like, he muttered. Always being expected to be the smartest. The one who fixes everything. Who wins? Who leads? You're right, I said coldly. I don't know what it's like to be coddled by legacy. I built everything I have. I earned every seat I sat in. You inherited yours. And you gambled it away on ego and greed. The door opened behind me, Miles signaling time. I stood slowly. Think about the deal, I said. Or don't. Either way, this isn't a negotiation anymore. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned. You once told me I didn't know how to play the game. That I was too by the book. He looked up, eyes burning. I wrote a better book. And I left him there, in the dim glow of the interrogation room, surrounded by everything he never saw coming. My nameplate wasn't even installed yet, but the glass walls of the corner office already felt like mine. It overlooked the Chicago skyline, steel, stone, and ambition rising together in stiff, quiet pride. Northwind Technologies had once been Nate's dominion. But now, its empire of illusions had a new occupant. The door clicked shut behind me as I stepped inside, the silence heavy. This space had once belonged to Nate. His scent still lingered faintly in the air, cologne and arrogance. But the desk, the artwork, the shelves. They were mine now. Every polished surface had been scrubbed of him. The shadows he left behind, however, still clung like a ghost. I stood behind the desk, running my hand across the glass, remembering the first time I'd visited this floor years ago. Back then, I was the supportive wife, offering to drop off lunch during a long quarterly report prep. Nate had smiled, thanked me, and ushered me out of the office with a kiss on the cheek and a lie about back-to-back meetings. That was also the first day I saw Eva. I'd recognized the look in her eyes. Not admiration. Ambition. She wasn't there to learn. She was there to climb. Now, as I looked at the stack of reports on my new desk, internal audits, legal memos, crisis PR strategies, I realized something that made me pause. This office was too quiet. Not literally. The city buzzed beyond the windows. Phones rang down the hall. Staff shuffled papers just outside. But something deeper, some pulse of truth, was missing. Something Nate had suffocated under layers of manipulation and performance. I unlocked the top drawer. Inside, a sealed manila envelope. The final remnants of Nate's shadow. Inside were three things. First, a flash drive labeled Cascade, full chain. The master file connecting every one of Nate's fraudulent transfers. Second, a signed memo he'd never sent, an internal directive meant to quietly restructure stockholder voting rights, centralizing power under his control. And third, a single photo. Us. Taken at the company's 10th anniversary gala. He was smiling, his arm around me, and I was laughing, genuinely, foolishly, freely. Before I knew. I stared at that photo for a long moment. Then, without ceremony, I dropped it into the shredder beside the desk. The machine buzzed quietly, reducing the illusion to strips of denial. A knock on the door interrupted the silence. It was Jenna, the board liaison. Young, sharp, and finally beginning to look me in the eyes without the awkwardness people reserved for the ex-CEO's wife. "They're ready for you," she said. The conference room down the hall held a different kind of battlefield. Investors. External counsel. 3 of the firm's largest international partners tuned in virtually. A press team already drafting the official statement. They all wanted to know the same thing. How do we recover? I entered with a file tucked under one arm and a calm that felt earned, not borrowed. "We've lost $12 million in unreported offshore transfers," I began. $5 million in tax liabilities, and the last audit was so manipulated it reads like fiction. We're exposed on every front. The room shifted in discomfort. But we're not broken. We're lucky. Confused stares. Lucky, I repeated, because we caught it before the SEC did. Lucky that Ava Lynn chose survival over silence. Lucky that every piece of evidence we need is already packaged, time-stamped, and admissible. A beat passed. Then one of the investors leaned in. "What about leadership? Who takes over once this mess is cleaned?" The board chair spoke up. "Camille has been appointed interim chief compliance officer." The leadership committee will vote on permanent executive restructuring once criminal proceedings settle. I don't want permanent, I interjected. Not yet. A murmur. I want results first. Proof that this company can walk through fire and come out honest. That starts with zero secrets and total visibility. Can you deliver that? Someone asked, skeptical. I already did, I replied, holding up the flash drive. This is everything. The entire web. Unedited. I handed it to legal counsel. Run it through compliance. Cross-check it with every open claim. By Friday, I want every remaining ghost account locked, every falsified report flagged, and a forensic audit team embedded on site. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was respect. As I left the room, my phone buzzed. A private message. Asterisk, he took the deal. 20 years. He named the others involved. It's over, asterisk. I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked the phone. Back in my office, the skyline hadn't changed, but the view felt different. Clearer. Sharper. This was no longer the seat of someone else's power. It was the launch pad for something real. I walked to the window, gazing out over the city Nate once ruled from above. And I smiled, because I could finally feel the sun without his shadow in the way. Buried beneath old case files and faded receipts in my home office drawer was a sealed white envelope, yellowing at the edges. No address. No stamp. Just my handwriting, looping neatly across the front. To the man I thought I married. I had written it the night everything broke, the night I found the bracelet receipt tucked behind Nate's passport, dated on our last anniversary, when he claimed he had forgotten the date entirely. The letter had never been mailed. Not out of hesitation, but because I realized something even more painful than betrayal. He wasn't the man I married. He never had been. That letter wasn't meant for Nate. It was for me. I held it now, seated alone in my kitchen with the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Morning light spilled through the windows, painting warm lines across the tile. The city was already awake, but for once, I wasn't rushing anywhere. I opened the envelope. The ink hadn't faded. I remembered writing every word. I had been shaking then, angry, confused, broken. And yet, the letter was calm. Too calm, like someone writing their own eulogy. Asterisk, you told me I was your anchor. But I wasn't tethering you, I was just in your way. I wanted to believe we were partners. That we were building something. That every late night and early morning meant something more than just growth charts and mergers, asterisk. But you were always building something else. I paused, taking a breath. The pain in the words still lived, but it no longer stung. Asterisk, you wanted the image. The headlines. The prestige. And I gave it all to you, without ever asking you to give me truth in return, asterisk. I folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. I would not read the rest. Not now. My phone buzzed beside me. It was from Agent Grant. Asterisk, Ava has left the city. Entered the protection program this morning. New ID, new address. She's safe, asterisk. I stared at the message. Ava. In all the chaos, I hadn't allowed myself to process what it meant to share a mission with the very woman who helped fracture my life. It had started with an accidental discovery, her name tied to an international wire that didn't belong to any known vendor. I traced it back to a holding company with a Montreal P.O. box. And from there, I found her pattern. Ava had done this before. Multiple identities. Always targeting men in power with something to hide. She was methodical. Calculated. But when I confronted her in that hotel suite 3 months ago, I saw something unexpected. Regret. I offered her a deal. Full cooperation. Immunity. A way out. She accepted it not out of fear, but relief. I'm tired of pretending, she told me. Tired of being someone else just to survive. We weren't the same, Ava and I, but we understood each other in a way only two women ruined by the same man could. Back in the kitchen, I poured coffee into a chipped mug, one Nate had once tried to throw away for not being presentable. I had kept it out of spite. Now, it felt like a trophy. A ping drew my attention. My email inbox. The subject line, Northwind Technologies, Emergency Investor Session Outcome. I opened it. The board had approved my full authority to execute the recovery plan. The leadership committee had voted unanimously to freeze Nate's remaining deferred shares. The press release was already attached. But one message stood out. A direct reply from Elliot Carter, Nate's father. Camille. Asterisk, you were right. I was wrong about you. I should have seen it sooner. You didn't destroy my company. You saved it. I only wish I'd trusted you before everything had to fall apart, asterisk. Elliot. I stared at the message for a long moment. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. But it was something Nate had never given me. Acknowledgement. The last time I saw Elliot was at the Gala, moments before the takedown. He hadn't looked surprised. Only tired. As if he'd been waiting for someone to finally drag the truth into the light. Now he knew it was me. I walked into my home office and opened a drawer, one filled with scattered pieces of the past. Photos, tokens, certificates. I placed the sealed letter inside, then closed it. That chapter was done. A knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find Jenna, the board liaison, holding a sleek portfolio binder. They want you on the morning broadcast, she said. To explain the plan. In your own words. I hesitated. She stepped forward. Camille, she said softly, they're finally listening. To you, not just as Nate's wife. As the woman who held this company together while he nearly destroyed it. I nodded slowly and took the binder. Tell the driver I'll be ready in 20 minutes, I said. Back in the kitchen, I took one last look at the empty letter. Then I smiled, not because of what I had survived, but because of what I had become in the fire. The new studio smelled like nerves and sanitizer. Cameras rolled on smooth tracks while producers barked quiet instructions into headsets. I sat alone beneath the white-hot lights, the city skyline stretched behind me like a painting of a future I finally controlled. Ms. Hart, we're live in 30 seconds, the anchor whispered with a tight smile. She was young, polished, the kind of woman I used to be before I learned that perfection meant little when truth was hiding in the walls. I adjusted my collar, a navy blazer with clean lines and no silk, power over polish. My mic clicked on. The anchor straightened her cards. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2. Good morning, Chicago. We begin with breaking updates from Northwind Technologies, the firm rocked by scandal following the arrest of its CEO, Nathaniel Carter. With us today is Camille Hart, the company's newly appointed Chief Compliance Officer and the whistleblower whose evidence brought the case to light. Ms. Hart, thank you for being here. I met the camera with calm. Thank you for having me. Let's begin with the question on everyone's mind. What was the tipping point? What finally made you act? I breathed slowly. It wasn't one moment. It was thousands. A pattern. A slow erosion of trust, between people, departments, leadership. And then I saw the numbers. The lies weren't just personal. They were structural. And when truth starts to crack, it either collapses or someone holds it up. And that someone was you. I didn't flinch. Yes. The anchor blinked, surprised by my clarity. She shuffled her next question. You've known Mr. Carter for years, personally and professionally. Did you ever imagine he was capable of this level of deception? No, I said truthfully. But that's what makes fraud so effective. It wears the face you trust most. She was quiet for a beat. Then, carefully, she asked the question I had prepared for. Some say your actions were driven by revenge. That this was a personal vendetta disguised as justice. I understand why it might look that way, I said evenly. But facts don't need motivation. The documents, the accounts, the signatures, they speak louder than anyone's opinion. If holding someone accountable looks like revenge, then maybe we've grown too comfortable with corruption. The control room went still. I could feel them listening. And what happens now? The anchor asked, leaning in. What happens to Northwind? I sat taller. Now, we rebuild. With transparency. With oversight. With leadership that isn't afraid of hard questions. We've launched a full forensic audit. Every deal signed in the last 3 years is under review. Every executive who signed off without diligence will be reevaluated. And more importantly, we're creating a culture where speaking up isn't just tolerated. It's expected. And your role in all of this? I'm not here to save Northwind. I'm here to make sure it never needs saving again. A moment passed before she spoke again. Ms. Hart, there's been a wave of support for your actions, from corporate watchdog groups to financial ethics councils. Even the Department of Justice released a statement commending your extraordinary contribution to the exposure of white-collar crime. How does it feel? I looked away for half a second, catching my reflection in the glass behind her. The woman staring back wasn't the one who'd once cried in her kitchen with a letter in her hand. She wasn't the one who shrank at Nate's shadow. She was sharper now. Still. Clear. It feels necessary, I said. After the segment ended, I walked offset into the hallway where Jenna waited with my coat. They're already clipping sound bites, she said. Investors are buzzing. Your inbox is about to explode. I'll deal with it later, I replied, slipping on my coat. Let them talk. I'm done speaking for the day. My phone buzzed. A single message. Asterisk he saw the broadcast. From prison, asterisk. Miles again. I didn't reply. Let him watch. Let him sit in that cell and see the woman he once dismissed as background rise in front of a nation. Let him feel the consequence of underestimation broadcasted on every screen he couldn't escape. Outside, the wind bit at my cheeks as I walked toward the car. Reporters called my name, cameras flashing. But I didn't stop. I had another meeting. Another department to rebuild. And a company to unbury from its own shame. Because legacy, once broken, is only dangerous if you leave the wrong people in charge of repairing it. Northwind's executive suite had always been off-limits to me, not in name, but in practice. Nate used to joke that some rooms were just too boring for his brilliant wife. I had smiled, nodded, and left those rooms behind like they were dusted in invisible ink. But now I held the keycard. And every door opened. The top-floor conference lounge overlooked Lake Michigan in full summer bloom, a view once reserved for board retreats and silent power struggles behind smoked glass. I stepped inside, heels echoing across polished stone, trailed by a team of internal auditors and legal analysts. We weren't here to network. We were here to dismantle what Nate had built in the shadows. This was his war room, Jenna whispered, almost reverently. He used to meet with foreign partners in here. No paper trails. No recordings. No oversight, I said flatly. That ends now. We began cataloging everything, file cabinets hidden inside closets, 2 locked drawers under the bar cart, a secured tablet left charging behind a panel of designer cabinetry. The contents weren't shocking anymore. I was long past shock. But the pattern never ceased to fascinate me. Shell companies linked to campaign donations. International vendor agreements with no actual vendors. Strategic alliances that benefited no one but a handful of off-grid bank accounts in Liechtenstein and Belize. One document caught my eye. A single sheet, folded crisply and slid between 2 pages of a leather-bound operations ledger. It was an unsigned exit plan, dated 6 months before the gala. In it, Nate had detailed how he planned to shift Northwind's ownership under a silent trust, sell off 32% to a foreign hedge fund, and relocate operations to Dubai under a new name. The signature line was blank. The name next to it. Mine. He had planned to take everything and forge my approval on the final document. I stood silently, staring at the paper for a long moment before sliding it into a fresh evidence sleeve. "You okay?" Jenna asked from across the room. I looked up. "Yeah," I said. "I'm just realizing how much more he intended to steal." Hours passed in a blur of codes, cross-references, and data extractions. We found files in backup routers, thumb drives stashed in air vents, even one inside a hollowed-out book with a fake spine. Nate had left pieces of himself in every corner of this tower like a haunted architect too proud to erase his blueprint. But the walls no longer belonged to him. As the sun began to lower behind the lake, I stepped into his former office, mine now by technicality, but still bearing the cold geometry of his taste. Nothing warm. Nothing soft. Just sharp edges and steel ambition. Behind the desk, I found something I hadn't expected. A framed photo. Not of us. Not of Ava. But of Nate alone, standing beside his father in front of the original Northwind logo, hand on a ceremonial shovel, breaking ground on what would become the company's first headquarters. He looked young. Earnest. Before the greed swallowed him whole. I didn't feel pity. I felt closure. This was the room he thought I'd never enter. The decisions he assumed I'd never be capable of making. The empire he once guarded like a gatekeeper to greatness. But now, I held every master key. I turned off the lights, locked the doors, and left that suite behind, not because I didn't belong there, but because I had bigger rooms to build. Downstairs, a group of new hires waited in the training atrium. 20 bright eyes looking to understand how a fallen company could rise again. I stepped onto the small stage at the front, cleared my throat, and began. "This is Northwind," I said. "Not the version you saw in headlines. Not the one that collapsed in scandal. But the one that's still here. And worth saving." They leaned in. And for the first time in a long time, I spoke not just as someone rebuilding trust, but as someone reimagining power from the ground up. The first time I spoke at a shareholders' assembly, I had sat silently in the back row, hidden behind a sea of men in tailored suits who never bothered to remember my name. Nate had stood at the podium, his voice smooth as marble, feeding projections and promises like gospel. He was the voice of the company. Until now. The boardroom was packed, not with the usual back-patting executives, but with a hybrid crowd of long-time investors, wary analysts, and newly appointed department heads chosen for their integrity, not their connections. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation, tension tightening like strings before a symphony began. I adjusted the mic, cleared my throat. Looked no one in the eye, and everyone. My name is Camille Hart. Some of you may know me as a former operations officer. Some may only know me from headlines. But today, I stand before you not as a title or a name, but as a promise. A promise that what this company becomes next will be nothing like what it once hid. Silence fell like snow. I continued. Let's begin with transparency. These packets contain full disclosure of all ongoing investigations, internal reviews, and settlement plans with affected vendors and partners. I won't insult your intelligence by painting a rosy future without addressing the rot we just removed. I could see the board chair twitching slightly. The lead auditor nodded, ever so subtly. We will not rebrand. We will not bury our past beneath a shiny new logo or rename ourselves to escape scrutiny. We are Northwind. And we take responsibility. There it was. Gasps. No. But quiet shifts in posture. Eyes widening. Notes being scribbled faster. I flipped the page. Effective immediately, Northwind will implement an independent ethics oversight council with veto power over all high-risk contracts. We are opening a whistleblower hotline accessible globally. Every major deal over $2 million will be reviewed by a dual compliance system, one internal, one external. I looked down briefly. There was no teleprompter. No speechwriter. Every word came from the woman who had once been pushed out of this very room. And now occupied its center. Some of you may fear that this will slow us down. That integrity is the enemy of efficiency. But I would argue that what slowed us down was the lies. The fear. The unchecked power handed to one man because he spoke louder than anyone else. I paused. And yet, here we are. Still standing. And from this moment forward, we will be loud about truth. A hand rose from the second row. An older man, Bennett, a longtime partner who once laughed when Nate referred to me as his brilliant but idealistic wife. What gives you confidence that any of this will work? He asked, voice clipped. I didn't blink. Because you're still here, I said. Because despite the scandal, despite the exposure, every single one of you showed up today. That tells me you believe there's something here still worth salvaging. And if you didn't, you wouldn't have bothered to attend. He lowered his gaze. No rebuttal. Just silence. I finished with a simple line. I won't ask you to trust me. I'll show you why you can. When the meeting ended, there was no standing ovation. No ticker tape or champagne. Just people who walked out slower than they walked in, thinking. Processing. Some even smiling. Later that evening, a clip of my speech made its way to national news. It was shared by financial watchdogs, tweeted by young professionals, and dissected by leadership podcasts. One comment stood out beneath a viral repost. She doesn't sound like a CEO. She sounds like a reckoning. I sat alone in my apartment, reading that line over and over. Because maybe I wasn't just taking back what was mine. Maybe I was changing what leadership looked like, sounded like, and felt like for people who had never been invited to the table. And that was louder than Nate ever could be. The name Nathaniel Crane used to echo through every corner of the Northwind building. From reception desks to elevator conversations, he was the myth people whispered about, the storm everyone prepared for. His presence lingered like perfume in a sealed room, expensive and hard to breathe. But now, his name was disappearing. It began subtly. A meeting invite that once read, Nate's Review, became Operations Alignment. A policy manual that used to quote his speeches now opened with a preface from the Ethics Committee. His personal parking space was reassigned without announcement. Even the signature on Northwind's quarterly report had changed, mine, typed clearly, no longer beneath his shadow. It wasn't just erasure. It was evolution. But that didn't mean the ghosts left quietly. 2 days after the shareholder speech, I received a legal summons. Nate's attorney, still clinging to loyalty, or desperation, had filed an injunction against the use of shared intellectual property. He claimed I was misusing patents and systems he developed independently before we were married. I laughed. Because those patents. I filed the provisional applications myself, in a rented co-working space while Nate was still honeymooning his ego across hedge fund circuits. I had copies. Timestamps. Original drafts, some still with coffee stains and side notes in my handwriting. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No reporters. No crowd. Just a judge with tired eyes, a clerk tapping keys, and two opposing tables separated by tension. Nate looked different. Paler. Less sure. Wearing a suit that no longer fit the myth he built around himself. His attorney began with veiled jabs, calling me an emotional ex, accusing me of corporate theft, painting Nate as the genius betrayed by an opportunist. But when it was my turn, I stood, walked to the stand, and submitted evidence that was sharper than any argument. Emails. Design drafts. Patent drafts signed with both our names. Even a voice memo where Nate himself referred to the design as Cam's brainchild. I just made it sexy for the VCs. The judge reviewed each one silently. Then, in a calm voice, she said, "Motion denied. Ms. Hart retains all rights. Mr. Crane, consider this your last attempt to revise history under oath." That was it. A single gavel strike. And the man who once demanded the world chant his name was now a ghost in legal footnotes. I stepped outside, the sunlight warm for the first time in months. Jenna met me on the courthouse steps. "He's going to vanish now," she said. Not immediately. But quietly. Like a king no one wants to remember. I nodded. Good. Let him. We walked down the sidewalk, past street vendors and students and commuters who had no idea what just ended. But I knew. It wasn't just the close of a case. It was the collapse of a mythology. A man who built power on smoke and mirrors, finally unmasked, not with vengeance, but with receipts. And I didn't need to say his name ever again. Because from now on, when people told Northwind's story, they would start with mine. You don't realize how much space someone takes up until they're gone, not just their voice or presence, but the architecture they shaped. Every hallway Nate walked through had carried his echo. Every policy bore his fingerprints. But once the foundation of that myth burned down, I was left standing amid the soot and silence. And somehow, it felt like freedom. The first thing I did was redesign the office layout. Not out of pettiness, but necessity. The glass walls were removed, replaced with warm wooden dividers that offered privacy without isolation. The corner offices Nate had used to play favorites were turned into collaborative pods. The door to the executive wing no longer required a special keycard. We started hosting open floor lunches, no agenda, no roles, just voices at equal height. People who had once spoken in hushed tones now laughed freely. For the first time, even the interns felt like they belonged. But culture was just the beginning. Northwind's partnerships had taken a hit during the scandal. To regain trust, I flew out personally to every top client we had. Japan. Brazil. Toronto. I shook hands, listened more than I spoke, and told the truth, even when it stung. "This is not the same company," I said in one meeting, "because I'm not the same woman." And that's not just a line, it's a guarantee. Some were skeptical. Some leaned in. And one investor, an older woman named Miriam whose family business had been with Northwind since its early years, looked at me and said, "You remind me of why I started mine." We signed a multi-year deal that afternoon. Still, not everything rebuilt easily. I received anonymous emails, former Nate loyalists trying to scare me, hinting at unfinished business. I forwarded everyone to our new legal and compliance teams, then deleted them with a smile. Let them haunt themselves. I was done living in his ruins. At night, I worked late, not because I had to, but because I loved the feeling of creating without fear. My new office had floor-to-ceiling windows and a single framed quote that read, "Build rooms that others don't have to escape from." It reminded me daily that leadership wasn't about control. It was about creating space. Jenna became head of strategy. Marcus, our former whistleblower, now ran internal ethics operations. Even Claire, who once feared retaliation, led Northwind's community initiative program. One afternoon, as I walked through the new lobby filled with soft jazz and natural light, I saw a young employee escorting her mother on a tour. "That's her," she whispered. "That's Camille." Her mother nodded. "The one who made it through the fire?" "No," the girl replied. "The one who built the new house." I kept walking, not acknowledging it. But inside, I was burning again. Not with rage. With resolve. Because it was never just about proving Nate wrong. It was about proving that we could survive the collapse of power, and still build something beautiful in the ash. The morning I signed the final acquisition papers, the sky was the kind of overcast that used to put dread in my bones. Before, gray meant uncertainty, risk, fog of the future. But now, it felt like clarity. No illusions, just truth diffused through light. Northwind had just acquired Solmara Systems, the same rival Nate once mocked for, playing too safe. The irony was poetic, but the decision was strategic. Their clean code, ethical infrastructure, and people-first policies were everything I wanted in the foundation of our future. I stood in the new glass conference room, not the kind Nate used to isolate himself, but one that opened toward the city. No blinds, no secrets. "We don't just own the skyline now," Jenna joked from beside me. "We shape what reflects off it." The team laughed. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a full-circle moment. That afternoon, I received an email from a contact in Zurich. It was short. Subject, the archive. Message, "We thought you should have this." He tried to bury it. We made a copy, ****. Attached was a trove of audio files, contracts, and internal memos from Nate's time in Zurich, things I never had access to before. Among them was a recording. I played it. Nate's voice. Clear. Desperate. "She doesn't know it yet, but she's going to destroy me. And the worst part is, I think I deserve it." I sat for a long time after that. Not because it hurt. But because I didn't feel anything anymore. He had already vanished. This was just an echo. I copied the files, handed them to legal, and told them to do what they saw fit. I wouldn't use them in public. I didn't need to. I had already won in a way he never could have understood. Not through scandal. But by outlasting the fire. Later that week, I stood before a graduating class of young entrepreneurs at a university event. I had been invited to speak on rebuilding after failure. I walked onto the stage in a simple navy dress. No power suit, no armor, just me. "My story isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about remembering who you are before someone convinced you to forget." They listened in stillness. My advice? Keep one window open. Even when everything collapses. That one window might just save your life. Or show you a new one. I didn't talk about Nate. I talked about starting over. About ethics. About building rooms without locks. As I left the stage, one of the students caught up with me. She held a journal with my name scribbled in the corner. "I was going to quit," she said, "until I heard what you survived." I paused. "Then don't just survive," I said gently. "Build. And let the light in." That night, I returned to my home, a space filled with soft jazz, uncurtained windows, and framed photos from the rebuild. No trophies. No articles. Just faces. People. The real currency of legacy. I poured a glass of wine, turned off my phone, and opened the balcony doors. The sky was still overcast. But it was no longer gray. It was silver. And for the first time in years, I stepped out and breathed like I was finally home.